Hi everyone, welcome back to the Understanding and Managing Emotions workshop for parents and carers of teens. Thank you for joining us in week 2. So week 2 today is focusing on managing emotions. So last week we thought about understanding, and then the focus this week switches a little bit more to focusing on strategies for managing emotions. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully you'll find some of the strategies in here helpful. We can go on to the next slide, Maria. Thanks so much. So just in case any of you didn't join last week, we're just going to run through the online ground rules again. So it's handy if people have a pen and paper that they can use. Hopefully we'll share some tips that you're keen to write down and remember. Everyone is on mute, and cameras are also turned off, so you can see me and Maria, but we can't see anyone. It's still possible though to raise a hand, and please do feel free to ask questions in the chat. What we'll do is we'll monitor the chat just in case there are any issues with sound or anything like that, then please do let us know. But otherwise we'll save questions until the end. If we have time, we'll come back to them at the end, go through. And if there are any we don't have a chance to answer, then we'll try our best to cover everything by the end of next week. Confidentiality is important to remember. Obviously, if people do share information in the chat, just would like to ask people to hold in mind that the space should be confidential, and people should feel that it's a safe space to share things. And also we're talking about a tricky topic, emotions and managing emotions. And so we just ask people to hold a non-judgmental stance when they join as well. The sessions are being recorded, so hopefully we can upload this to YouTube so that other people can share the learning and watch it after it's finished. So yeah, do let us know if you've got any questions. Otherwise, we'll start with a quick recap on last time. So in session 1, we focused on the understanding emotions, and particularly teenage emotions. So we thought about why emotions are important. So we shared some information about both positive and negative emotions, and thought about why they're important for communication and really key for survival as well, particularly emotions like anxiety. And I guess our key message there was that we don't want to get rid of like what we sometimes call negative or like tricky emotions for teenagers, but instead we want to help them to understand them and to learn some strategies to manage them. Because trying to get rid of them would never work. Like, unfortunately, there are times when we all experience tricky emotions like sadness or anxiety, especially in these tough times. And so instead of getting rid of them, we want to skill our teams up with some strategies for managing when they're around, and help them to learn that they can cope through tricky times, and that things will get better and that they'll be okay. Linked with that, we thought about the concept of emotional avoidance and the fact that actually, it's quite natural for us, especially as parents, to want to protect our teens from experiencing negative or difficult emotions. But instead, we wanted to just encourage people to support teens to accept that those things happen, and like I said, that they can manage when they do come up. We spoke about the teenage brain, and I guess the key takeaway message there was that it's a tricky one. So there are lots of brain changes in teenage years, and I guess that the main point there is that as much as we can try and understand and share strategies for managing emotions, it's always going to be tough for teens, because that part of the brain that helps us to manage emotions doesn't finish developing until around the age of 25. The teenage years are tricky in terms of emotions, but hopefully we'll share some strategies today that will help. And linked with that, we thought about the idea of use it or lose it. So in the teenage years, not to go into it in too much detail, but the brain goes through a process that we call pruning, which basically just means that the parts of the brain that we use get strengthened and more efficient, more effective. And so I guess the thing we wanted to share there was this idea that if we skill up our teams with strategies for understanding and managing emotions, that they're parts of the brain that will get strengthened and will be more effective for the rest of their lives. So it's a really good opportunity in the teenage years to teach skills linked to emotions and emotional well-being. And then the last point that we really wanted to share last week was around parental self-care. And I guess linked to that idea that, yeah, the teenage years are tricky. So it will be really important for you all to look after yourselves as well as look after your teens. And we shared the concept of the oxygen mask metaphor, which is the idea that in order to be able to help others, we need to look after ourselves first and put our own mask on before we try and help others.
Like last week, we're going to take a quick break before we start. And today we're going to do a bit of a breathing exercise. Again, we hope that this is something that you either find useful for yourself, but also that this is something that you can maybe do with your teens or teach your teenagers. And before we start, I'm just going to invite you to sit comfortably where you are. And we're just going to take 3 deep breaths. I'm not going to count you in or anything. I trust you can take 3 deep breaths in your own time. I like to do this before we start, just to show that we don't always have to do a full-on mindfulness exercise. Sometimes it's enough to stop for a few seconds and give ourselves a little bit of a breather in the day. But also, I'm going to invite you to sit comfortably with your legs on the ground and your hands rested in your lap or holding your belly. Some people find that useful. And if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. If you're not, then rest your eyes on something in front of you. And just bring your attention to your breath again. And notice your body on the chair and what it feels like. Maybe you can notice the sensation of your weight on the chair. Maybe notice parts of your body that are in contact with the chair. And parts of your body that don't contact the chair. If you drift off into your thoughts, simply acknowledge where your mind went and bring it back to noticing the sensation of sitting in the chair. From time to time, you may notice that your attention has wandered off as you get caught up in your thoughts, or maybe distractions around you. And this is quite normal. It happens to everyone, and it may happen repeatedly. And each time you notice your mind wandering, take a split-second notice to where it took you, and gently bring your awareness back to noticing your body and the sense of your weight on the chair. Next, direct your awareness to your breath. See if you can notice the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. Allowing your stomach to expand and your chest to gently rise and fall. Become aware of your breath flowing in and out. Simply notice the natural flow of the breath without changing or modifying it in any way. Take a few slow, deep breaths. Notice the sensation of air filling your lungs as you breathe in, and then deflating as you breathe out. You may notice the sensation of cool air around your nostrils as you inhale, and the warm air as you exhale. As you do this exercise, the feelings and sensations in your body may change. You may notice pleasant feelings or sensations, such as relaxation, calmness, and peacefulness. You may notice unpleasant feelings, such as boredom, frustration, or anxiety. Whatever feelings, urges, or sensations arrive, whether pleasant or unpleasant, gently acknowledge their presence and let them be. Allow them to come and go, and keep your attention on your breath and the sensation of sitting in the chair. Lastly, bring your attention back to noticing your breathing. Notice again the steady rhythm of your breath that is with you all the time. And when you're ready, bring the attention back to the room you're in. And open your eyes if they're closed. And just take a minute or second to notice what you can see and what you can hear around you. And if you felt really relaxed, you can have a little bit of a stretch. And I hope that was a nice grounding exercise to start us off with, and that you feel relaxed for the rest of the presentation. So, like Laura said, we're going to talk more about strategies today, and we do this, as we've said, we don't want to stop our teens from feeling, or encourage our teens not to feel the negative emotions that come up. But we tell the teens, when we do this webinar for teenagers, we often tell them that we can't help what we feel, but we can manage how we respond to our feelings. And this is an important thing to take with us, that our emotions happen and they are what they are. We can't help that. But if we can have some strategies in our toolkit to manage our negative emotions and negative feelings, it might make them easier when they come up.
So we wanted to introduce you, before thinking about specific strategies, to a couple of concepts. And the first is this idea of flipping your lid, because actually the strategies that we use can change depending on how our teams are feeling and where they're at in terms of flipping their lid. And so when we talk to teenagers or young people about this concept, we often use a hand as a model. Kind of looks a little bit like a brain. So we use it as a model of the brain. And basically, the emotions part of our brain is almost like the thumb. So maybe if people feel comfortable doing it, they can do it along with me. But the emotions part of the brain is the thumb. It's sometimes what we call the reptile part of the brain as well. So all animals have this emotional center of the brain. It's where our emotions come from. And humans are unique in that they have what's called a cerebral cortex that comes around that central emotional part of the brain. And this bit's really important. It helps humans to do what we call like higher level thinking, so the things that maybe animals can't do, like reflecting on our feelings, or problem solving, or slowing down and thinking about how to manage. It's a part of our brain that helps us to feel calm. And so when teenagers are feeling really overwhelmed by emotions, we call like their lid is flipped, and they're just responding to this emotional part of the brain. And that means when our lid's gone, it's really hard for us to do things like make good choices, to think about risk, to sort of put ourselves in other people's shoes. So if you notice when maybe think of a time when your teenager's lid might have flipped, or your own, we might end up saying things that we don't mean. We might act out with things like aggression or shouting, because they're not really thinking through what's the best way to manage this situation and to feel calm again. So the strategies that we're going to talk through first are strategies that will help hopefully to keep the lid on. And then later we'll come back to think about some strategies that should help when the lid is flipped, because all of our lids flip sometimes, but the more we can help teens to keep that lid on and to keep their thinking brain engaged so that they can think through how to manage and how to respond to difficult feelings, the better, really. So that's just a little whistle-stop tour of flipping your lid. We could maybe share afterwards a video just to go into that in a bit more detail. We can send that in an email. And then the other concept that we just wanted to mention quickly before going on to strategies is values. So we often think with teenagers about values, and I guess it basically just means the things that are important to us in life, that our values give us meaning, and also they're completely individual. So what might be important to one person might not be important to another. And I guess that's important to hold in mind when we're thinking about, one, what brings up negative emotions in our teenagers. Something like, I don't know, like Fortnite or something on social media, like might bring up negative emotions in our teens, and we might think, what that, why is that bringing up such negative emotions? But depending on what matters to us, what is important and what we value, that is linked with strong emotions. And it's also linked to what helps us to manage. So as you go through the strategies, I guess we want to invite you to think about your teens specifically and what might work to them, or what might fit with things that they enjoy or the things that they already value. Because if we can weave strategies into those kinds of things, then they're much more likely to use them and to add them to their toolkit. So yeah, we just want to share a little bit about values before we now go on to think about some specific strategies for managing negative emotions. I think, and yeah, these are just some ideas of value, just to illustrate what we mean by value. So obviously things like compassion are really important to some people, to teens. Things like independence might be really important and be something they really value. And so I guess, yeah, we want to invite you to sort of tune in to what's important to your teen, and maybe kind of hold that in mind when thinking about what might trigger tricky feelings, and then one also what might help them to manage those.
So we're going to start by thinking about strategies that might be helpful to either keep the lid on or before you flip your lid, or teenagers flip their lids. And we're going to start with what's called covering your bases. And the bases are the body, achievement, closeness, enjoyment, and stepping back and relaxing. And what we mean by covering your bases is finding a balance in all of these different areas to help you feel as best as you can and help your teens feel as best as you can. And with the body, we mean things like exercise or eating properly, and even just resting, giving ourselves time and space to rest. With achievement, it's things like at school, getting good grades, or doing well at work, and it can give you a really nice sense of it gives you a lot of good feelings when you achieve either small goals or bigger goals. And so creating things in your daily life that make you feel like you've achieved something, whether this is work related, so ticking off something on your list, or whether it's home related, so doing some of the chores, or it can even be related to one of the other areas that we're going to talk about, like body. So if you don't particularly want to exercise but you've done it, it might feel really nice and like an achievement afterwards. And achieving something makes us feel really good. The next one is closeness and connecting with other people. This is harder during a global pandemic. It's harder to see people, and we all miss our loved ones at this moment. But it might be that putting in some extra time to, now that hopefully we can soon meet one person outside or more people outside, maybe we put some more time aside for that to see them, or if it's just calling a family member or a friend, connecting to other people can also make us feel really, really good. And it's something that we as adults or as teenagers, it can give you a little bit of extra energy to get you through. The next one is enjoyment, so things that you enjoy doing, things that give you energy. And as a parent, knowing what brings you joy and activities that you enjoy doing purely for you is really important. And we touched on that a little bit last time, finding things for you, but also showing teenagers that doing the things that they enjoy is good for their own health as well. And the last thing is stepping back and relaxing. So taking time for yourself. Sometimes when we have a lot of emotions or we're feeling really full up, it can be really useful to take some time away, either whether this is to give yourself some self-care or going for a walk, or maybe just pure being alone. Actually being alone for a little bit can give you some time to reflect or give you some space between you and what's going on around you. And this can be really difficult at the moment, but it's important to try and bring in. And trying to think a little bit about if there are certain areas that you are better at. A lot of us are good at certain things. We might be really good at eating well or exercising and focusing on our achievements and feeling like we're doing really good, but we might not have been as good at doing things that we actually enjoy purely for enjoyment, or taking time to step back and relax. And thinking a little bit about if there are any areas that you can improve. And then we've already tried some of the mindful and relaxation exercises listed here. Lara introduced us to something similar to the grounding using the 5 senses last week when we did a little exercise at the start. We've tried a little bit of relaxation and breathing, and mindful breathing today. But mindfulness and relaxation are ways of getting into your body and getting out of your busy head. And it can be really useful if you're struggling with low mood or anxiety or like sleeping. And there are loads of mindfulness apps, or yoga can be a form of mindfulness in that you'll be focusing on your body and something else. And sometimes mindfulness and relaxation aren't going to be very helpful if your teen is feeling really angry. It might not be helpful to sit down and think about or try to do breathing exercises. And then we recommend that you try maybe a little bit heavier exercise, and maybe some running or some HIIT, to really try and get out of your head and into your body, to give yourself some space from everything that's going on in your head, and some time away to reflect. And if there are any of these that you think you can do with your teen, or you can teach your teen, that is always really useful. And it might be a nice way to try and connect with your teenager. And then lastly, talking about your emotions. We've all had that experience when we are so full up of what's going on in our heads. It can be really difficult to relax or make sense of it. and talking about how we feel might help us feel less full up, or it's a bit like taking the air out of the balloon or mentioning the elephant in the room. If we ignore emotions, they don't go away, and a lot of the time they get worse and harder to deal with. And so allowing a bit of space or allowing some room to talk about how we feel can be really, really helpful. And part of that is thinking about how we respond to someone when they share how they feel. So think of a time when you were really upset or really angry or stressed, and someone made you feel worse. What was it that this person said and did to make you feel worse? Just so that we can avoid that in the future. And then also think of a time when someone made you feel better. What is it that helps you when you feel bad, and how can we use that when our teenagers feel bad? Because we really want to create this safe space for teenagers to talk about their feelings. And we can only do this if we have the right responses when that happens.
Yeah, so I guess we wanted to invite you to just kind of reflect on that for a moment, because actually often we get caught in what we might call like talking traps. So I think we have certain phrases that we hear all of the time, like, things like "don't be silly," or "oh, I just wouldn't let it bother me," or "there are worse things happening, someone else has it worse than you," or I'll go through these in a little bit more detail, but yeah, just to kind of say, sometimes we kind of say these things because we've had them said to us hundreds of times, but I guess we wanted to just encourage you to kind of reflect on, actually, when I've gone to a friend, and when I've been struggling, when I've been finding something difficult, and I've let them know how I'm feeling, if they've said something like "don't be silly" or "just wouldn't let it bother me," has that helped? Like, how did that feel? And maybe for some people it does, but I guess we're just inviting you to sort of be mindful about how we respond, especially when talking to teenagers about feelings, because it's not easy. You might be sat there thinking, this sounds great on paper, but actually getting my teenager to talk to me about their feelings is really difficult, and so it might be something that we have to do really gradually, and it might not just happen overnight where all of a sudden they open up about this stuff. But I guess, yeah, just maybe reflect on times when maybe your teenager has opened up a bit, like what did you say, or maybe times when they've just shut down straight away and gone to their room, or been like, "well, don't want to talk about this stuff, asking me questions," or something like that. What did you say then that maybe caused them to shut down? And yeah, it can be helpful to reflect on our own experiences first and think, when I go to a friend and talk to them about a tough time and I end up feeling really good, what is it that they do that helps me to feel good? And then maybe you could try some of those things out with your teens. So yeah, some common traps that we can fall into when we're talking about feelings are saying things like "don't be silly" or "I wouldn't let it bother me," and often that can make us feel like maybe we're a bit weird for feeling what we feel, or there's something wrong with us. Maybe our feelings aren't valid or they don't count, and it's really common for us to say these things, and it links to that concept that we introduced last time called emotional avoidance, that this is our attempt to kind of get rid of negative feelings, or we want to just take them away for our teenagers, and so we can kind of like shut things down by just saying, "just don't let it bother you," or "don't be silly." But yeah, it's not always helpful to avoid emotions. I guess instead we want to encourage you to feel comfortable to have these conversations with your teenagers, and for them to feel comfortable to open up. So yeah, there are worse things happening in the world is a really common one that we often might say, but it's not always a person's sort of situation or what's going on in their life that might make them feel anxious or sad, but it's how it affects them and how they think about it. And so yeah, it can often feel, yeah, not that nice when we maybe say, there are worse things happening. It might make your teen think, mum or dad are right, like I'm being like stupid, I better not tell them about it again because they'll just think I'm weird or something like that. Also, yeah, it kind of links to saying, "oh, at least this isn't going on," or "at least you're not in this person's position." We want to validate what our teens are feeling and what they're going through, and let them know that whatever they're feeling is okay and it's important, and we want to help them through it. Yeah, saying like you're doing this wrong, it can be hard, like as parents, you have to juggle that role of like teaching our teens things, and so there are times that maybe you want to say, oh, you're not doing that quite right, but there might be a different way to say it, I guess, rather than saying they're doing it wrong, just kind of trying to suggest different ways or help them to explore different ways to manage, rather than just kind of telling them they're getting things wrong. It doesn't always sit well with teens. Or just saying, oh, you should just do this, do what I do. Often with teenagers, they're more likely to do something if they've kind of come up with the idea themselves. So just providing a space where you can talk with them and think about how they're feeling and how they can respond, and maybe respond differently to tricky feelings. If they're involved in that sort of conversation, if they're involved with coming up with ideas themselves. Sorry, I've been logged out. Hopefully you guys can still see me. They're much more likely to do it if they've come up with these ideas themselves. And I understand how you feel, really common one as well that we've all kind of heard, but sometimes it just it gets our back up a bit, because we think, no, you don't know how I feel, like everyone's different, everyone's experiences are different. And so I guess, just be mindful of saying, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're going through. So we've written down some some suggested responses that might help when you're trying to talk to teens about their emotions. So just sort of saying, that sounds really tough, like really try and put yourself in their shoes, and it might be something like, I don't know, like their eyebrow went wrong when they were doing their makeup, and you think, oh, that wouldn't bother me, but actually, if you maybe put yourself in their shoes and think about the pressure on teens with like social media and what it can be like in school, then you would think, actually, that probably would be quite tough. And just saying, it makes sense that you feel sad, because X, Y, and Z has happened, and so there's no wonder that you're feeling sad. Letting teens know that they're not alone, they're not weird if they feel sad or worried about certain things, that lots of people feel the same way as them. Often it can be really helpful for teens to know that you've experienced something similar, and to let them know what you did that helped when you felt that way, either when you're a teenager or now as a parent or carer. And just saying, is there anything you need from me right now? Like, what can I do to help? And I guess the idea is that if we give our teens this helpful space to talk about their feelings and to get support, and if that conversation's been useful, they're much more likely to do it again. And I guess, just in general, before we move on to strategies that help when the lid flips, these strategies for helping to keep the lid on are things that we're suggesting that you just become part of your everyday and of your teens everyday. Really try to weave these things into your daily or weekly routine, because when we get into habit of doing them and covering our bases, relaxing, maybe doing some mindfulness and talking about how we feel, if that just becomes part of our day, our week, then it's much more likely that our lid will stay on.
So moving on to when the lid is flipped. Oh, there we go. We'll start with walking away and taking a break. So when your teenager's lid is flipped or your lid is flipped, it can be really easy to stay in that situation and try to work it out, which can sometimes work, but other times it can result in you saying things you don't mean, or those saying things they don't mean, and it can escalate the situation. So one of the things we'd like to start with is similar to the stepping back and relaxing, is walking away and taking a break and finding something else to do so you can cool down, so that they can cool down, and when you come back you can have a little bit more of a constructive discussion, because as Lara explained at the beginning, once the lid is flipped, you're not going to be able to reason with someone who's purely emotional. They're not going to feel like you're hearing them or that you understand what they're going through, and you're going to feel like you're talking to a bit like talking to a wall, or it's going to feel really frustrating, and having a constructive conversation is going to be hard. So in this picture, it's a bit blurry and it's a little bit small. There are 50 different ways suggested to take a break. So it can be resting, taking a bath, colour in books, dancing, calling a friend, going for a walk. All of these are different things that if your teenagers knows to do these things, or if you know to do these things, you might feel a bit calmer when you come back. And you might be able to resolve the situation better. Worst thing you can do is stubbornly stand in the situation. If it's not moving anywhere, you're not going to get anywhere with it. And maybe letting your teenager know that they can go and do something else, so they can go take a break from the conversation and the argument, or whatever they're in the middle of at that moment. It might not be an argument even, it might just be that something really stressful has happened to you or to them, and they're too in it to be able to focus on the solution or think clearly about it or rationally. And so doing something completely different and stepping away from it can be really, really helpful. Do you have anything to add to that, Laura, before I move on?
No, I think that sounds great. Thanks, Maria. We will send out the 50 ways to take a break so that you can actually read it. Sorry, that's so fuzzy, but yeah, we'll send it out after you finish the workshop. So yeah, those strategies that Maria mentioned can be really helpful when our lid has flipped and we just need to take a break and do something that helps the lid to come back down, so that then we can think through, like Maria said, you know, problem solve, come up with a helpful solution, talk things through, reflect on how we might do things differently next time. And so yeah, the idea is that it's helpful for teens and for us as parents and carers to be calm first before we have discussions, and so doing those things is really helpful. Sometimes teenagers get so distressed that even that suggesting that they take a break can be really hard. And so these strategies are some strategies that we use for teenagers who are experiencing really intense distress. So they might be useful to your teens, they might not, they might just be something to hold in mind if you ever notice your teen's incredibly distressed and it's really hard to kind of get them to do anything else or to get them out of the really tough position that they're in terms of emotions. And so one of the things, so TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, or progressive muscle relaxation. So temperature is a really good one. So changing your body temperature, it kind of shocks the system and it restarts it. It triggers like a survival mode, and it kind of distracts us from that intense emotion because our body's like, oh gosh, I need to like survive rather than worry about my emotions right now. So using cold water or ice can be really helpful. So I guess on a sort of lower level, splashing your face with some cold water, or for some teens, like having some ice cubes in the freezer that they can put in their mouth or hold on their hand can be really helpful. Actually, the opposite can work too. So if you have any teens who are brave enough to like eat a chili or something, like hot temperatures can work as well. So yeah, I guess the idea is that you talk about your teens first, like if they are experiencing intense emotional distress often, or if it might happen, just kind of talking through these things with them, talking through which might work, and then kind of being ready. So yeah, having some ice cubes. Some teens like to make their own flavoured ice cubes to keep in the freezer in case they need them. Intense exercise, so either if they're up for it, you know, going for a run, or even just like jumping on the spot, doing some star jumps, running up and down the stairs. It helps to sort of release that sort of energy that's built up when our fight or flight, like real intense emotional response is triggered. Paced breathing, so you could use bits of the breathing exercise that Maria talked us through at the beginning, but even something as simple as breathing in to count of 5, pausing, and then breathing out to count of 7. It's important that, the out breath is always longer than the in breath, because sometimes we can end up hyperventilating if we breathe too quickly. So yeah, talking to your teens about some sort of breathing relaxation exercise can be really helpful. And then progressive muscle relaxation is another one, and we're going to do that as the sort of take a break exercise at the start of workshop 3. So we won't go through it now, but in case you can't make it to workshop 3 or anything like that, you can just Google or have a look on YouTube for progressive muscle relaxation and have a look at that one. Thanks, Maria. And I guess like with all of these strategies, kind of similar to what I was saying earlier and what we thought about last week, it's often helpful to stop, to look and observe what's going on. And it can be really hard. Our teenagers being, experiencing difficult emotions or being emotionally distressed obviously triggers difficult feelings in us as well. And we can get sort of drawn into that and, like we mentioned before, like have arguments sometimes, or we can not know what to do because we're distressed as well. And so we just wanted to remind you of how useful it can be sometimes just to stop and sort of reflect on what's going on. Again, because like we said, every teenage is different as well. And hopefully we've shared some general strategies, but the next step will be to kind of think about how you can apply that to your teen in particular. So yeah, if your teenage is experiencing emotional distress, maybe anger, low mood, anxiety, maybe have a think about what's going on for my teen that could be causing this, or when this has happened in the past, what helped, what hasn't helped, and what do they need from me right now, but also what do you need right now? Do you need to speak to a friend, take a break, go for a walk? The strategies that we've shared today are ones that we've used lots of teenagers and young people, and we know are effective for some people. They're effective for adults as well, so maybe have a think about whether there are any of the strategies that we've thought about that you can use in your weekly routine or your daily routine that might help you as well. And then, yeah, just like I said, these difficult experiences, teenagers, like we said, are tough, and teenagers experience a lot of tricky emotions, and it can be exhausting for parents and carers. And I guess we just want to invite you to have a think about whether any of these thoughts go through your mind, because sometimes they can kind of get in the way of that ability to sort of step back and reflect. So things like, how can I make her feel better? How can I fix this? Or I hate seeing her upset. Those kinds of feelings, they lead us to that emotional avoidance sometimes. So we want to just take away like those horrible feelings as quickly as possible, so we can fall into the trap of thinking, how can I fix this? And when our teens, are talking about what's going on for them, we can just be suggesting how to fix it, but sometimes that gets in the way of us really listening and really tuning into what's going on for our teenager. So try to take the pressure off yourselves to always sort of fix things. And again, maybe think about, for yourself, when you're struggling or having a tough time, actually is what's most helpful, just have someone or, a space just to talk that through, just to get things out there, rather than needing someone to fix things for you. Often it's helpful just to have a space to talk and to be heard. And things like I'm failing as a parent and carer are so common, and when our teenagers are experiencing difficult emotions, of course we blame ourselves often. But I guess we really want you to sort of hold in mind that these are really common for teenagers to experience difficult emotions. Maybe think of your own teenage years, and it happens for everyone. They're really normal, difficult emotions that are inevitable, but this idea that we're failing and being really hard on ourselves can really get in the way and can lead us to feel down or to feel worried, and then it's harder to be there for our teens if we're feeling low or feeling anxious ourselves. And then, when she or he is upset, it makes me feel. So again, sometimes, if when your teen is angry, it makes you feel angry, then that can lead us to get into arguments and things. Or when your teen is worried, it might stir up those feelings in you as well. And yeah, again, it can sometimes get in the way of us being able to kind of stop and reflect. So maybe, recognize what feelings are coming up for you when you're a teenager is emotional, because that's telling us something. Sometimes it helps us to understand, what we're feeling might be what they're feeling, so it can help us to understand. But yeah, make sure that you remember to look after yourselves if your team's having a tough time, because it will bring up difficult emotions in you as well. And so that's it. They're the slides that we wanted to go through today. But before you go, we just wanted to encourage people, because we've shared a lot of information, just to maybe think of one take-home message. So one thing that maybe we've mentioned, or maybe a thought that's been triggered in your mind, or something that's come up for you that you maybe wouldn't want to forget. Obviously, we're all super busy and lots going on, so maybe writing it down might be helpful, so that in a week or something you might come back and have a look at it, or maybe in months even. So yeah, maybe think about one take-home message, and then maybe 2 strategies that you might like to try for yourself. Maybe it could be helpful to practice some of these yourself, because we can be more likely to kind of sell it to our teams if we kind of buy into it ourselves. So maybe 2 strategies that you might try, things that you might look into a bit more, whether it's mindfulness apps, or doing some relaxation, whether it's trying to do a little bit more, getting outside and walking, getting a bit more sleep. Yeah, as always, if anyone feels up for sharing, please do put them in the chat. But otherwise, yeah, maybe just make a note of these things for yourself. And I guess we have got time for some questions if anyone has any. Do feel free to put them in the chat if anyone has any questions.
There was one question, Laura. Someone said, what if the teenagers keep saying that it's been a really bad year and nothing is going to work?
Yeah, it's really tough, and you know what, they've got a point. It has been a really tough year, and so I think just sort of validating that and being like, yeah, it's been rubbish, and you know, if you have found it hard, just being open and honest about that and being like, yeah, I found it hard too. I guess the bit that we might want to work on is that nothing's going to work or nothing's going to be helpful. Sometimes when we feel low, that comes with a sense of hopelessness, and we can feel, like nothing's going to get better. So it might be about thinking with them about how to still get some of the things that they still enjoy into their week. So, you know, maybe thinking, are they covering their bases? And if not, what could we try and add to their week? And then you could maybe, sometimes it's helpful to sort of keep a record. So maybe keep a bit of like a mood diary or something. So they might rate every day how they're feeling, you know, on a scale of like 1 to 10, if 10 is the best they could feel and 0 is the worst. Where are they at each day? And then at the end of the week, maybe if at a time they're saying, you know, it's never going to get any better, or I feel really rubbish, they can sort of reflect and look like, oh, actually, on that day, I was a 7 out of 10. But it can be easy to forget that when we feel rubbish on a Friday or something like that. So that could be something to do with your teams to encourage them to, or maybe like try out an activity and then get them to rate their mood and see if it helps. And then you can think about how to do more of those things that have led to a higher rating out of 10. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Maria.
No, I think it's very understanding that you would feel that way. I think this year has been a little bit, I mean, 2021 and 2020 were a little bit endless in what happened, so it can feel like nothing will help. But hopefully incorporating some of the strategies, or at least thinking a little bit differently, like you said, about what's happened and what's going on, will help put a little bit of perspective in and help reframe that thinking. And hopefully, as they learn that emotions aren't permanent, it will be a little bit easier to learn to manage them.
Yeah, as far as a parent, you can remember any times when you felt like that, because sometimes for teens, they haven't had that chance, you know, that life experience to have gone through something tough and to have had that experience of things feeling like they'll never get better. It could be that they're experiencing it for the first time, but if you have been through it, it can be helpful for you to share, or, you know, if one of a family friend or someone else that your team knows who they sort of trust and would feel happy having a chat with, you know, they could let them know that, you know, there are times when I felt like that as well, like things aren't going to get better, but they do, because, you know, that's life. It's that emotional roller coaster that Maria talked about last week, that, you know, the downs happen, but the ups are also inevitable. Like, you know, downs are inevitable, but ups are too, and just letting them know that it will pass. And it's hard to plan in things that we feel excited about at the minute, because obviously we don't know when we're going to be able to do things again. So maybe even encouraging them to think further into the future, and think about things they might look forward to, you know, in a year's time or a few years, or, you know, they've got a whole exciting life ahead of them. So trying to help them to think about that could be helpful at the minute. Thanks for that question. It's really helpful to think about.
I don't think we have any more questions at the moment.
Okay. So we could finish at 5 minutes early, and yeah, encourage everyone who's taken part. You just won 5 minutes of free time, so maybe go and do something nice for yourself, get a little bit of fresh air, make a cup of tea, take a moment just for a little bit of self-care, now that you've won 5 minutes. And hopefully we'll see you again next week at the same time, same place. Next week we're thinking a bit more about how to put what you've learned into practice. You know, yeah, like we said, it's kind of easy to sort of talk about these things on paper, but how can you apply what you've learned to actually helping your team to understand and manage their emotions? We'll think about that a bit more next time. And yeah, okay, I think that's it. So yeah, have a lovely weekend, everyone, and we'll see you next week.